Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. So tonight I'm going to be talking about regulating variable milfoil, which its scientific name is Milfoil heterophyllum, and adapting management methods to a changing environment. Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what milfoil actually is, and then we're going to walk through some responding to changes, some changes that we can't control. How do we get rid of infestations like variable milfoil? We're going to briefly touch on a recap of what we did in 2019. Then we're going to go over what we've been doing thus far in 2020 and how you all can stay involved. So first and foremost, what is milfoil? So we all need to get in the habit of stopping saying milfoil as meaning all the invasive aquatic plants in the world, right? Because we have native milfoils here in Maine. So when we talk about milfoil remediation or milfoil in Great Pond, we're actually talking about an invasive milfoil, talking about an invasive plant. So we either need to specify that we're talking about variable milfoil or just calling it invasive milfoil if we don't remember its common name. So invasive aquatic plants like variable milfoil are very well adapted to living in lots of different environmental conditions and also geographic areas. So here is a picture of an idealized pond or lake. This is called the littoral zone. So the littoral zone is the region of the water where light can actually penetrate through the water column and hit plants that are growing out of the benthic region. So if you can see my cursor here, it's kind of ideally separated into the emergent vegetation area that has things like cattails and our pickerel weed, and then it goes into the rooted floating vegetation like our lily pads and spatter dock, and then the non-rooted floating vegetation, which we don't have much native of other than bladderwort, and then we have the submerged vegetation. So milfoils are considered submerged vegetation because all the vegetative, meaning non-reproductive tissues are underneath the water level. You might see some sticking up out of the water, but those are special features called emergent flower spikes that we'll talk about later. So although this picture shows these like neat, cute little divisions of regions where specific things grow, that's not how it is. That's not how it is out in the world. So it's often very homogenized and very mixed. And it's even more mixed when you have an invasive plant that can get its way into different regions and different niches and then outcompete native plants like lily pads or other submerged aquatic plants. So this slide is showing the 12 most unwanted invaders. So these are all invasive aquatic plants that should be on our radar and that we should all actively try to be able to identify. So the ones that are highlighted in red are ones currently in Maine. And then the ones that are highlighted in blue are ones that we don't currently have in Maine, but they're very close. They're in New Hampshire, Connecticut, Massachusetts. So we should familiarize ourselves with them now so we can get those early identifications. It's incredibly difficult to eradicate an invasive aquatic plant once it has become established in an area. So early identification is really key. So if you want to learn more about all of these 12 most unwanted invaders, then I encourage you to please look at the Lake Stewards of Maine website. They're doing all online Zoom webinars this season. So you can actually get certified from your own home just by watching a couple hours of a slideshow, getting really good at plant ID, taking a short quiz. So you can identify these on your own. They also have literature that you can purchase on like field guides to take out when you paddle around so you can find these. So the link to their webinar for their plant control workshop is right down here. And of course, you can always contact us and I can go over these plants more in depth with you if you'd rather that. So all of these invasive aquatic plants shown here are incredibly well adapted and they can live anywhere in the littoral zone. and they can outcompete any of our natives very quickly. They have rapid growth rates, and they have special adaptations that allow them to just deal with these environmental conditions that our native plants are really lacking in. So this table is from the Department of Environmental Protection, and it shows all of the current invasive aquatic plant infestations that we have in Maine. And I've highlighted all the ones where variable water milfoil, that's VLM, are. And you can see that out of the 29 infestations listed here, 20 of them are actually variable water milfoil. So we're really going to focus on that because that's the one that we have most of in Maine. And that's the one that we have here on Great Pond as well. So I would like to bring your attention to the map real quick. So we're here in Belgrade. So the yellow boxes here are infestations of variable leaf milfoil in Messalonsky and also in Great Pond. But just a half hour down the way in Cobbossee, right down here, right here, they actually found two new types of invasives, and that would be the frogbit and the Eurasian water milfoil. So Cobbossee is a very short trip down the road from us, and they have two brand new infestations they found last year. One of them had been there for, they think, a while. So that just really brings home that we need to be out there looking for these things and training people on how to find them, because they're just down the road and they can sneak up on us at any time. So when we talk about milfoils in general, a milfoil is defined as any aquatic plant that has feather divided leaves. And I hope you can see my cursor here. So the top left image is one single leaf from a milfoil plant, and it has these strands called leaflets, and they are connected at the same junction on a stem. So they're coming out in a feather divided formation, like a V coming out from the same part. So one of these leaves was plucked off of a whorl. So down to the middle image, this is one whorl of leaves. So variable milfoil typically has 4 to 6 leaves per whorl. And then the leaflets, those little hairs, there's usually around 11 leaflet pairs on one stem. So my guess would be that this actually isn't a variable milfoil sample and is probably one of our natives. And then this is what a whorl would actually look like on the stem here. So I've mentioned that we have native species of milfoil. So how many native species of milfoil do you think we have? We have 2 invasives. How many natives? Okay, great. Yay, first poll is in. Successful. Okay, great. So 57% of you answered 6, which means you've probably been to one of my presentations before. So that's great. And those who answered 8 and 2, never fear, we will go over some of that tonight. So the correct answer is yes, we have 6 native species of milfoil here, and then we have the 2 invasives. So this is what our invasive that we have in Belgrade looks like from if you're snorkeling or from a canoe. So it often appears like a bright, vibrant green when you're underwater, but when you pull it out of the water and you're just holding a fragment just out of the water in your hand, it won't maintain that color. It'll look brown, sometimes reddish brown, sometimes a dark green. So it's really only underwater that'll have that kind of neon green appearance. And this is described as being a bottle brush formation, but I like to think of it more as like a house cat tail. So it's a little bit wider at the base, and then as you move up, so towards the water surface, it tapers off, so it gets skinnier towards the top. None of our native milfoils do that except for farwells, which is a lot smaller than variable milfoil, and it's bright red. It's this beautiful pink fuchsia red color. So that doesn't really look like it. So remember that variable milfoil is tapered, and just think of a cattail, a house cattail. They do have emergent flowering spikes. So what that means is that they'll have their reproductive organs actually up above the water. So they have these reproductive stems, and then at the top of the stems, they have flowers and fruits. And this is what a microscopic picture of it blown up looks like. These leaves here that look almost like succulent leaves, like a Christmas cactus, those are special leaves called bracts. They start off as the normal leaves, and then they slowly form into those specialty bracts that are meant for out of the water. And they look so much like a succulent plant because they kind of are in a way. These have a waxy outer film, and they're very thick, and that's to prevent the tissues from desiccating, because this is an aquatic plant that's sticking out of water. So it's actually evolved to deal with that. So it's kind of just like a desert plant. And then right here, you can see the flowers that are just above the bracts. And right here, these are the male stamen. So variable milfoil is monaceous, which means one house. It means that male and female reproductive organs are on the same individual. So the modes of reproduction of variable milfoil, they can reproduce by fragments, root division, and seeds. By far the most common way that aquatic plants in general reproduce is by fragmentation. The very nature of aquatic plants is to be saturated in water and in their nutrients. So they're relying heavily on wind, wave action to break off parts of their tissues, and then those will get blown somewhere else, and then they'll completely regenerate into a whole new plant. Variable milfoil is highly, highly adapted to autofragmentation. So what that means is that the tissues are, when they grow higher up to the water level they grow, they're more brittle. So if you see variable milfoil up at the water surface, you really need to avoid paddling over it or swimming through it or anything like that, because if it's that high, and if you even just a stroke in with a paddle, it will create lots of fragments. So autofragmentation happens naturally in the plants as they get older and mature. And then the allofragmentation, of course, is caused by humans and also waves, wind. So right here, I'm holding in my hand just a bunch of fragments that had naturally broken off. And that is a very common thing, to have huge whole stem lengths of fragments just blown off. And that's why it's so difficult to manage, because they just fragment off like crazy all the time. So the middle image is a fragment that had broken off, and it started producing roots before it even touched the bottom of the lake. So variable milfoil fragments remain buoyant for over 30 days. They usually don't lose their buoyancy till after 30 days and after they've run into something else. So they'll start producing roots before they sink to the bottom, so they can quickly colonize and anchor themselves into the sediment. And then the third way of reproducing, of course, is sexually through seed in reproduction. So as of right now, there's no evidence in Maine to suggest that they are producing seeds. However, there have been studies in New Hampshire showing that they're producing viable seeds there. And this image was taken last week, and it is showing that the flowers are already ripening into fruits. They're maturing into fruits, which is about a month or so earlier than it would normally happen. And it also tends to not really happen here in our water body. The plants usually end up dying off naturally for the fall before the fruits actually mature. So it is something to be concerned about. So the left image here with all these adorable yellow floating plants, this is showing a healthy pond ecosystem. It has a lot of floating emergent plants, you have some reeds in there, and there's a whole layer of these submersed plants underneath. However, mixed in with those submersed plants underneath is variable milfoil. So the next image off to the right was taken just 1 month after that first picture was taken. And now all you see here is variable milfoil. So this is just showing how fast and how significant this is, and how easily they can just take over native plants and reduce biodiversity. So I have another poll for you guys. Out of this image on the left, so the healthy plant community only, how many different types of milfoil do you think are in that patch? So 33% said 1, and the people who have clearly attended before have gotten 3. 3 is the right answer. So one would be the correct answer for the right side. This has just turned into a complete monoculture of invasive milfoil. But on the left one, underneath all of these floating plants, I actually pulled 3 native milfoils out of here. So this is what the 3 native milfoils look like on herbarium paper pressed. And this is just showing that one is not like the other. So all 3 of these are unique individual species. We have another poll for you. If you could answer this poll, asks you what things about these plants are different from each other. So what could you use as some kind of identification to tell an invasive milfoil from a native milfoil apart, or just one from the other 2 apart? So the first 2 plants have emergent flower spikes here. And then the third one, this plant here is a native one. It's called Farwell's. And this is the one that looks like beautiful red fuchsia underwater. But they're all kind of ugly out of the water. So this one will never produce an emergent flower spike. It actually produces its fruits and flowers in the leaf axils. So that's what the arrows are pointing to. It will always be, their reproductive structures will always be underwater. And then the first 2 ones with the emergent flower spikes blown up, the first one has those succulent leaf looking bracts here. So that one's variable. And then this one also has emergent flower spike, which might, alarm you if you see out in the field, but then you'll see these tiny little feather divided bracts here. So that means it's whorled water milfoil. So if you see something like that, then it means you have the native. So you might be wondering, okay, if we have so many native milfoils, then why are these milfoils bad? Why these 2, did we just randomly choose them to be bad? No. So the reason why they're considered invasive is because they did not co-evolve here with our other organisms. So this map shows the native and non-native distribution of variable water milfoil. So in the light yellow, this is non-native. The dark red shows infestations in the non-native area. And then this huge orange area, that's all native. That's all native territory for variable water milfoil, which is really interesting, isn't it? Because we tend to think of invasive plants as something from just the south, or just Eurasia, or just from somewhere not here. And while that's true, it has a huge native distribution. And I want to point out why that is. So if you look at this map, this is the Mississippi River here. And then all of these small rivers and streams connecting to the Mississippi are all part of the Mississippi flood basin. So the native distribution of variable water milfoil is actually isolated just to the Mississippi flood basin. So all the rivers that drain into the Mississippi are connected. And the reason how this happened, or why this happened geologically, is from the formation of mountain ranges. So to the east, we have the Appalachian Mountains, to the west, we have the Rockies, and then to the north, we have the Canadian Shield. So this is what has isolated over millions and millions of years has separated the Mississippi is these topographical features that have kind of kept it there. So when huge mountain ranges or islands or big land structures like that, when they pop up, what they do is they create what are called allopatric speciation, which means it separates species from each other so they no longer have any contact. So that's what we think happened with the milfoils, you know, again, over millions of years, and why we don't actually have variable milfoil native west to the Rockies or east over the Appalachian Mountain Range. So extensive genetic tests have been done in a lot of our populations in Maine, and the goal of these tests were to identify where the variable milfoil was coming from. And what they found was that there were two distinct population origins. One was from what was considered the continental region, which is mostly from the Great Lakes. And then the other was from the Atlantic coastal plain, which is where you get Florida and Georgia and those areas. And there's evidence to suggest that where you come from will deem how invasive you are. So the Atlantic coastal plain populations actually have more dominant traits that allow them to be more invasive, more competitive than the continental does. So Messalonski Lake, for instance, has both the Atlantic coastal plain and continental. Okay, so ecosystems are very complex. And I just want to touch on real quick the importance of invasive aquatic plants and how they affect so many other things. So this is a typical idealized food web, very cute food web of a pond. And it all starts with this little submersed aquatic plant right here that this tiny little minnow is feeding on or grazing on. It'll also use it for shelter and to lay eggs near and nest in. And then from there, the bigger fish eats the smaller fish. The great blue heron will eat the fish. Everything eats the fish, from tourists, local fishermen, to other fish. And then we, of course, have, you know, the osprey and all other things, you know, eating everything going on in the circle of life. But it starts with the aquatic plant. It really does. So when you have an invasive aquatic plant come into an ecosystem, it'll outcompete those native plants that these organisms have co-evolved with and depended on. So that's what's important here. You can't just replace it with an invasive plant because they didn't have this relationship built over millions of years. They didn't co-evolve together. So if you replace the native plants with an invasive aquatic plant, it won't fill that same niche, and it'll also just be detrimental to wildlife. So an invasive aquatic plant, like variable milfoil, will create dense mats. So fish can't actually nest in those dense mats. And when the plants are not photosynthesizing, they're respiring, and they're actually using up the dissolved oxygen storage that you have in a water body that those fish need. So not only do the fish not navigate through the plants very well, it can also reduce the oxygen that they need for survival. So I'm particularly interested in the fishery side of invasive aquatic plant control. And this has, of course, greater implications in our tourism and livelihoods here in Maine. We rely heavily on fishing industry. So these images here came from a paper in Germany. So Europe also has variable milfoil. However, they do not have a lot of infrastructure on dealing with invasive aquatic plants. These images came from a paper that was actually proposing to local equivalent of state agencies saying, hey, we need to do something about this. And that's just crazy to think of, is that we have lake associations and the Department of Environmental Protection and Lake Stewards in Maine. We have all these organizations that really pool together to help deal with this issue. And just now, places in Europe are, you know, that have had these infestations for decades are saying, yeah, no, we actually need your help. We need the government's help in dealing with this. So these pictures are infestations that are not actively managed. So in the absence of lake associations and DEP and everyone out there trying to remove these plants, this is what we would be looking at. So you can see in the background here of the right image, there's green water. This is an algae bloom that has come up from this excessive amount of tissue here. And there's just, you can't navigate it. If you can't navigate it, fish can't navigate it either. So just a little bit of shocking there. Okay, so invasive aquatic plants, a lot of their competitive traits that they have that enable them to dominate native vegetation are leftover traits way back from the Carboniferous period. So 360 million years ago, we're talking. So during this period in time, plants had started to evolve on land, and they were photosynthesizing like crazy. So they were producing tons of oxygen, and it was also depleting the atmosphere of CO2. So back then, remember that Earth was just gaseous wasteland with not a lot of life going on land because it was so toxic pretty much. There was so much greenhouse gas that it was really humid and hot and just not really conducive for a lot of different biodiversity, but it did create kind of like a tropical rainstorm a little bit. So all these plants were photosynthesizing, creating oxygen, and that just made too much oxygen for all of these organisms that were surviving under high CO2 and low oxygen levels. And that actually cooled the planet and led to an ice age that killed off a bunch of things. But the interesting part that connects back to what we're talking about is that there was a whole group of plants that migrated from the land back into the water. And those are the most evolved plants that we have now and the ones that are the best competitors. So they moved back into the water because that's where more CO2 was, because the CO2 in the atmosphere had been depleted, so they couldn't photosynthesize as well. And when they went back into the water, they evolved this ability to actually switch between using CO2 and bicarbonate as a carbon source, which is pretty unique. So the inorganic carbon pool in an aquatic and aqueous environment is directly linked to the pH scale. So here in Maine, our lakes tend to be around 6.5 to 7, have a pH of 6.5 or 7. So we have a high amount of CO2, but we also have a fair amount of, we have more bicarbonate. And that goes for pretty much any water body has more bicarbonate. So when you have huge monocultures of plants, they can actually deplete the amount of CO2 in the water. And I bet you're thinking, yeah, that's great. Plants take CO2 from the atmosphere. Awesome. That is great until you run out of CO2. So obligate CO2 users, plants that can only use CO2 for photosynthesis, will actually die because there's not enough CO2 for them. But the invasives, hydrilla, Eurasian water milfoil, variable water milfoil, have all adapted to being able to use bicarbonate. So they will continue photosynthesizing and keep building biomass and keep building monocultures and just kill everything. So another thing that is just a direct link to these ancient plants that went on land and they went back into the water are terrestrial morphs. So these adorable little pine trees right here are actually pretty treacherous because they're variable milfoil fragments that had been cast ashore. So they've been blown in by wave action or wind or humans, waterfowl, whatever. They got stranded on wetland and they morphed their tissues into a tiny, tiny little wetland dwelling plant that won't grow larger than a couple inches because it's just going to store as much carbon as it possibly can. And once the water level rises from a heavy rain event like we just had, or the dam, is open so water fills back in, then these plants will actually switch back into their submersed aquatic vegetative form. So things like drawdown treatments will not work with variable milfoil because they can outweight a period of drought. So this graphic here just kind of summarizes the reasons why we should all be concerned about variable milfoil. So of course they obstruct swimming, motorboat traffic, recreational activities. There's the implications on wildlife, particularly fish and water quality. And there has been extensive literature published on the impacts that invasive aquatic plants have on property values for people. One paper out of Lake Winnipesaukee actually estimated that property values were reduced by 40% when those water bodies were, when the houses around the water bodies were infested with variable milfoil. Research out of University of Maine, Orono has been looking at the relationship of mosquitoes using milfoil as a nesting ground, and of course the greater implications here for human health and the possibility of spreading infectious diseases, which is still being researched at this time. Okay, so have I scared you guys enough? I'm going to take, I think, one last poll. I think this is the last poll right now. So how scared are you guys? Do you want to hear more scary stuff? Or are you just done? You want to hear the happy things? Okay, almost 50-50. Either way, I'm going to tell you more scary things. It was a trick question. I lied to you. Of course, it was going to continue. Okay, so this graphic is showing how much an area has warmed over the past century. So the dark red means areas that have increased temperature the most, and the blue areas are either areas that have increased the least, or in some places they've actually cooled. So you can see that Maine has actually warmed 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit over the past century, which is of the highest rate, and it's not stopping. Maine is going to keep on getting hotter. It's going to keep on having longer growing seasons. So this is going to have really, really harsh implications for our native plants, because again, talking about evolution, our plants are not adapted to dealing with such drastic changes so fast. So it causes stress and it causes die-off. Invasive plants are just more well adapted to change. That's kind of the definition of invasive plant. They can deal with a lot of different environmental conditions, and they can deal with it really fast. So we need to be aware of that and be prepared for that. So this next slide is showing kind of a similar thing, but what this graph is showing is areas that are of high risk of invasives. So specifically, more invasives coming to Maine, not just the one that we're already dealing with. So these, this map was made from a combination of proximity to highways, proximity to ports, climate data, and tourism, and just like humans migrating around. And again, Maine is in the high risk area. We are extremely high risk of just having more invasives, both terrestrial and aquatic. So having those early identification systems and early prevention systems are our best bet. So now we get to the fun stuff and less scary stuff of how do we get rid of it? How do we solve these problems? So the Milfoil program, which needs to be changed to Invasive Aquatic Organism Program, so we all stop using milfoil as meaning all milfoils are bad, is divided into two tiers. We have the prevention side, which really focuses on courtesy boat inspections. So this is checking all trailers, all boats coming into our water bodies for any kind of plant fragment, and also invertebrates such as Chinese mystery snails and zebra mussels and the like. And we have Adopt-a-Shoreline, which works with property owners and volunteers, educating the public on invasive aquatic plants and teaching them how to survey and taking ownership of their shorefront. And then the remediation side, which is the part that I manage, we survey the water bodies for new infestations, and we also remove the existing noxious plants as well. So courtesy boat inspectors really are on the front line of keeping our water bodies safe. Last year, we caught a fragment coming from, it was coming from Belgrade Stream, which is completely loaded with variable milfoil. It's loaded with the strain of variable milfoil from the Atlantic coastal plain, so it is particularly invasive and a particularly good competitor. And it was going into East Pond. East Pond to this date has no invasives, no invasive plants, no invasive organisms in the water body. And of course, we also just did the alum treatment there. So they, you know, landowners around East Pond put a lot of money into protecting their water and getting it just looking beautiful again. So how awful would that be if after the alum treatment, then they ended up getting an infestation of variable milfoil, which they would have had if we didn't have courtesy boat inspectors out there checking things. So we've really upped the ante on CBIs. Our CBI manager has collected a lot of data on boats visiting our boat launches outside of what's considered the normal CBI range. So normally we have courtesy boat inspectors at all the boat launches from Memorial Day to Labor Day. And she found that we were actually seeing a lot more people coming after Labor Day in the early fall, late summer than we expected, you know, as high of numbers as we were seeing in the summer. So now we know that we need to adjust our plans and extend the season and seek donations from people and seek support from the state to extend those programs, because clearly the growing season is extending and the tourism season is also extending. So the likelihood of us getting invasives and then those invasives actually surviving longer is just increasing every day. And then now for my job, which is what you're all here for, right? Is how do I kill it? Okay, how do we kill this thing? So here the diver is holding a vacuum that you can't really see very well, but that's the suction dredge that the diver will take underwater, and then they'll rip out the plant and put it into the hose. So that's what that looks like here. It's called Diver Assisted Suction Harvester Removal. We just call it DASH. So on the boat, there is a sub pump that creates a suction, and then the diver takes the suction hose down with them, and they vigorously and very difficultly remove plants by digging out the roots in the mud. And then they feed it into the vacuum, which then spits out this discharge hose here into these suspended fragment nets, which are then hoisted up by Hannah and Aaron here, and then we later compost it on land. So a common misconception is that it's super easy and divers can just go down and literally vacuum up the bottom of the lake. That's not at all how it's done. These plants have serious, serious root structures that go very deep and also spread out horizontally, and they connect to each other in a series. So it's not just pull one plant, dig out those roots. It's a lot messier than that. This is another method that we use, which is benthic barriers. So the idea behind this is that you're covering plant material and you're shielding it from the sunlight so then it'll just die off and decompose naturally. So this little cartoon illustrates pretty much what we do. Usually we use surface supplied air, which is a form of scuba diving instead of snorkeling. And we roll out a material over the plants, and then we'll weigh it down with rebar most of the time. We don't really like to use rocks too often because rocks are part of the natural ecosystem and things need it. Crayfish hide under it. It's disruptive to the soil. So we use rebar and then we go back and pick it up later. LEA, pictured here, uses huge rolls of that blue tarp that you wrap your boat in when you winterize your boat. And then the third option would be herbicide. So the state of Maine does not permit herbicide use in an aquatic environment unless it is deemed an emergency. And how they quantify something as an emergency is, number one, it has to be an early infestation. So it's not a well-established infestation. It hasn't taken over. It's very, very early, and it's isolated. It has to be isolated from other areas, so the herbicide won't go out and affect other plants. It has to be very, very localized. And then the emergency component is if it's in a high traffic area and it has a high risk of spreading to other areas in the lake. So Cobbessy last year found Eurasian water milfoil, which is an incredibly aggressive growing plant. It's one of the worst aquatic plant, invasive aquatic plants that you can get. And they happened to get it right at their boat launch. So the state came in and made the call and actually did the herbicide treatment themselves. So lake associations can't perform herbicide treatments on their own. They need a permit to do it, and then the state actually goes out and does the herbicide treatment themselves. And they do not permit herbicide use unless it fills that criteria of being an early infestation, of it being isolated, and an emergency situation. So when our infestation in Great Meadow Stream was first found in 2010, it was already well established, so we were never in the running for an herbicide treatment. Okay, so we survey all of Great Pond shoreline, and we survey the high priority areas of Long Pond, East Pond, Salmon, McGraw, and North Pond. So in the lower priority areas, we usually just kayak early in the morning where there's a lot of waves and you can see the bottom of the lake pretty well. We consider a low priority area areas where we're not really likely to see milfoil based on several different variables. And then the high priority areas, we really focus on snorkeling or scuba diving because we want to be able to find something before it is a big plant reaching the surface. If it's a big plant reaching the surface, it's probably already created fragments and spread it other places. So it's best to catch it when it's just starting out. Even better if it's a non-rooted fragment. So last year, great news, we found no new infestations since 2016. We had 2 infestations found in 2015 on Pinkham's Cove and Austin Bog that were single plants. They were removed and they never grew back. So really, it's kind of no new infestations since 2012, but to be accurate, 2016. So we're still doing it. So in 2018, we developed, we took a lot of data. We swam the entire shoreline of Great Pond and collected data on plant density, geological features, sediment type, depth. And what we were doing here was trying to make a probability map so we could save time on survey and just be more efficient and save time and save money. So we put our data to test last year and we used our probability maps and we were able to reduce our survey time significantly and still be effective. We found no new infestations and we will continue to use that same method this year since it went over so well last year. We removed just under 30,000 gallons from Great Meadow Stream. We also worked in Belgrade Stream with the contractors doing the milfoil. And also friends of Messalonsky who take care of Messalonsky and the Messalonsky side of Belgrade Stream. All 3 parties worked together, keeping variable milfoil from hopping over the dam. And we also developed a new way of mapping the infestation in Great Meadow Stream. We didn't really have a lot of great data showing what the infestations, where the infestation was and how heavy it was in specific areas over time. We know that it's been there since 2010, but we don't really know what places were better or worse, if it's traveling or if it's in the same areas year after year. So we developed these maps that were based on plant dominance of invasive milfoil versus collective natives. And we applied that same method this year. So now we can actually compare side by side. Okay, did this patch come back this year? Oh, looks like we did a good job. We cleared it up, but there's another patch here. Maybe there's something blowing it there. So we can kind of pair that with hydrology data and wind. So we can really be better at predicting where it's going to come up. And the other great news from last year was that we got lots of emails and lots of phone calls about people seeing suspicious milfoil plants popping up all over the water bodies. This happened in Long Pond and in Great Pond especially, of new patches of native milfoils coming up, which is really exciting, a little bit scary at first until you verified that it's native, but it's great because we're seeing these native populations showing up and filling these niches, and the longer those native plants can be there and the more well established they can be, the better barrier they'll be from an invasive getting in there and staking its claim. So the way to tell them apart again is right here on the world. So this is native. They have feather divided bracts, so they're like little cones. And then the invasive one has that thick, think of a succulent plant, those thick blade serrated bracts there. Okay. So far in 2020, we have the same 3 infestations this year in Great Meadow Stream, Robbins Mill Stream, and Rome Trout Brook. So all 3 of those infestations have been actively managed since 2012. Last year, we found evidence in Robbins Mill that it was being reinfested by fragments flowing from Great Meadow Stream. So we know that we need to check up on that area more often. You know, we'll treat it and we'll remove all the plants and we'll think, okay, we're good. We can spend more time at Great Meadow Stream. And then we'll come back a few weeks later to check on Robbins Mill and there's more plants there again. So we know that we need to be more frequently checking up on that place and removing those fragments as they come in. Better yet, just removing the plant material in Great Meadow Stream to prevent fragments from ever getting anywhere. We still have the surface use restriction in Great Meadow Stream, which protects just a small area of North Bay around the mouth and goes all the way up the stream. It prevents motorcraft from going in. Paddlecraft can still go in. This year, this is our very exciting news. This is our new thing that we are just very, very excited about and really happy with so far. We have invested a lot of resources into benthic barriers that are made out of burlap. So the appeal of burlap is that it's biodegradable. So you can lay it down once, you never have to go back and pay a diver to go and pick it up again. True, you cannot reuse that material, but it has a longer lifespan because you don't have to remove it. So normally the plastic tarps you would have to remove because it's a non-natural structure. So you'd have to remove it before ice conditions because if it overwinters, then the ice will blow it around and it'll cause property damage or wildlife damage, any kind of damage. But the burlap can just stay down there. So what we do on rainy days is we take these rolls of burlap and we roll them out and then we stitch them together with a natural string. And then we'll form these barriers and then we'll roll them out underwater just like you saw in that cartoon. So our priority this year was to get started really early. So we started a month earlier this year than we have in the past few years, or I think ever actually. And part of that was in response to ice out conditions. Ice out conditions were a month earlier this year. So the plants came up a month earlier. So they were already, you know, up at the surface in May, which is very, very unusual. And the other part of that was we really wanted to target these massive patches that just continually regrow year after year after year. And we've been looking at the data and saying, well, what the heck's going on here? Are there seeds? Why does this keep coming back? So we have reassessed our methods and we have learned from it. And we know that certain things are uncontrollable. So this is us hitting back. And this is us coming up with a new plan in response to these changes. So we've been covering burlap over huge areas of monoculture. So that will free up more time for us to get into the mixed areas and dash and hand pull as we do. So the trick with the burlap is you should only use benthic barriers if it's over just a monoculture of an invasive plant. That goes for any material of barrier that you use. So we have been very careful to only use burlap in areas that are just monocultures of variable milfoil. So there is still a lot of area in Great Middle Stream, particularly the mouth, that is mixed with natives that we will not use burlap on because we'll just be killing so much native vegetation, and that kind of defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do, which is protect wildlife. So this is a really great example of what a monoculture that we covered looks like. So this is in an area called Marquis Hole, named after a diver that was always put in this miserable area to work, and they just thought it was hilarious to keep on putting poor Marquis there because it's filled with deer flies and it's awkwardly shallow, so you get eaten alive by deer flies, and then all of a sudden it drops off into this deep hole. So what we did was we filled Marquis Hole with burlap. So we started right here, just past the pickerel weeds. We didn't cover that. And then we covered the variable milfoil. So that area would have taken over a week to clear manually. We did it in 1 day. So we're really happy with the progress we're making on burlap. So we still do use diver-assisted suction harvester. So when the plants are really big and reaching the surface, we don't want to just cover it with burlap because that's going to cause a lot of fragments, and it's also going to create a lot of excess plant material that is going to need to decompose under the burlap. So another thing that kind of defeats the purpose. So we'll remove the tops, so we focus less on removing the roots, which is really what takes a lot of time, and then we'll cover it with burlap. So if you get the plants early when they're not too big, then you can get away with just rolling up burlap. If they're already mature and coming up to the surface, you really need to remove it with dash first. But these areas, we don't just hit once, you know, we have to hit it continually because they have those really crazy root systems that are just so difficult to get out. So you need to go back and hit the plants, hit the returning, the regrowing plants over and over and over again until you strip that root system of its carbon source. So now we can just hit it once, cover it with burlap, and move on to areas that are heavily mixed, like here with our diver, Maddie. He is hand pulling with a hoka scuba in an area mixed with pickerel weed here. So this is a perfect example of where we would not want to use burlap because we have all these beautiful native plants there that are providing habitat and food and substrate for other wildlife. So he'll go in and hand pull in these mixed areas. So now we can give these mixed areas a lot more attention because we're not just battling monocultures all summer. Here's another example of a heavily mixed area. This is at the mouth. This is by far the worst part of the infestation year after year is at the mouth. And what we think and what the state has suggested is that the mouth continually is a problem because these big patches way upstream that we never end up having time to remove are just continually reinfesting. So that was the first thing that we did this year is we covered those patches way up north. So now, you know, we've chased it downstream and we can really focus on the mouth. So hopefully now that those are covered up top, then they won't be recolonizing the mouth. So this is what we spend a lot of time doing in the mouth is working around lily pads and reeds and pickerel weed. So you can see these emergent flower spikes of variable milfoil coming out from underneath. And right now, just causing too much damage to these plants here, but they will outcompete these, you know, these lily pads and these other emergent plants for nutrients at the root. and also substrate at the root, and they can also shield it from light. And we pull out the milfoil, put it in tubs. So this is just us hand pulling out in the stream. And here is our new baby pile. Our pile that we've been composting in for 8 years got too big. We were asked to start a new pile because we had removed too much milfoil. So it's kind of cool because now we have a new pile, so we can actually get better images of what we accomplished in that year. So this was taken just after 2 weeks of removal. So it's much bigger now. So our next presentation, I'll have a better, bigger picture. So we've already removed around 1,400 gallons so far, and it's only July. And we have laid about an acre's worth of burlap. And to put that into perspective, there's 22 acres of Great Meadow Stream. So the rule for environmental conditions is you never want to cover more than 10% of a system. So we're well within that range and under that range. So it's not considered detrimental to the environment. And here's just a happy slide of some cute animals that really makes my day awesome, just seeing them all happy. So we have some bass and turtle and bullfrog here, all happy customers for cleaning up their waters. So Adopt-a-Shoreline, if you don't already know what it is an education program that works with property owners or visitors, anyone who spends time on the lake pretty much, where volunteers go out and survey a designated area of the water body twice a year, and they tell us what they find. They tell us if they find any invasives. So we provide them with training, a short training on how to identify the invasive or invaders that you should be aware of. And then you just go out and kayak, paddle, snorkel, canoe, whatever you want. The main thing here is to just be in contact with us. So if you see something that looks suspicious, you know who to call. You know that you can call Seven Lakes, you know you can call me, and we can go out and check on it so we can keep protecting our water more efficiently. So we survey all of this water of Great Pond and Long Pond anyhow, but having more eyes on the water is excellent because you never know when a fragment is going to blow in. It can happen at any point in time. So right here, this is Cody Pagic. He's our new Adopt-a-Shoreline coordinator for this year, and he's been doing absolutely amazing work with GIS. He has been going back over all of these yellow lines that have been claimed, but we realize that there's kind of a gap here in that a lot of these areas have been claimed, but those people have fallen out of contact. So we don't actually know if these people are still surveying their lakes or not, which is a problem. We really need to know if they're surveying it, because if they're not, then we can find someone else to fill that. Please get in touch with either Cody, which is Adopt-a-Shoreline at sevenlakesalliance.org, or myself. Just contact one of us so we can get you retrained. We can check and see if you're active and we still have contact with you. So please just reach out to us and we'll get that squared away right away. So how to stay involved. So coming up, we have several plant paddles. We do them every year. So this is a volunteer activity led by Cody, the Adopt-a-Shoreline coordinator. So what we do is we take volunteers out to the surrounding water bodies in the Belgrade Lakes area, and we just kayak survey, and we look for any of the 12 invasive aquatic organisms, aquatic plants that are on our list. So on Monday we have North Pond. So next week we have Salmon McGraw, and then East Pond is on August 1st. These events are BYOB, bring your own boat, and we are following the state regulations for being COVID safe and social distancing. So outdoor activities are highly encouraged. Our staff will be wearing masks to protect others So if you want to come out for a plant paddle, just be aware that we'll be wearing masks, and we just would like everyone to stay at least 6 feet apart, so we can follow those state guidelines. And we'll provide hand sanitizer and water bottles, but you just need to bring your own boat. If you do need a boat for some reason and you want to go, then just contact me and we can work something out. All right, so this schedule and the schedule for all of our events are on our homepage at sevenlakesalliance.org. And then we're also always looking for volunteers to come out and do fragment patrol with us. So fragment patrol is a really essential part of the remediation side. So I touched on earlier that these plants fragment off from anything. They fragment from us removing them, they fragment from wind, waves, beavers, muskrats, you name it, and it'll fragment the plants off. So the best thing that we can do to prevent the rest of Great Pond and also our surrounding water bodies, because fragments hitchhike and move other places, is to get these fragments before they get caught on something or before they root somewhere. So if you have a kayak and you want some kind of a fun activity to get outside, to bring your family, bring kids, bring grandkids, and you just want to kayak around and collect some fragments, then you are always welcome. Just get in touch with me and I can show you how to find them and how to identify them and get you set up. So I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Thank you so much for coming at dinner time on a Friday, I know. But thank you very much for attending. And also I want to thank all of our partners and all of our donors. So we cannot do this work alone. We have many amazing fundraising partners and support from state agencies as well. The towns are big contributors. So thank you all, and thank you to our partners. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I am here. It's 7:16, so we went a little bit over, but if anyone wants any more questions, I can be here. Oh, great question. Great question that keeps me up at night. Okay. So the flow is from North Pond down Great Meadow Stream and it feeds into Great Pond. So that is why people have always said that there isn't any variable milfoil in North Pond. So there is variable milfoil, there is invasive milfoil right up to the 225 bridge. We have not surveyed the second half of Great Meadow Stream yet this year, but we are going to be doing that on Monday. So we'll actually know if anything has traveled down that part of Great Meadow Stream. There hasn't been in years past that we have surveyed up there. My instinct is to say that I think why variable milfoil hasn't gone that far down or up Great Meadow Stream to reach North Pond is because that second half of Great Meadow Stream north of the bridge going up to North Pond has a lot of beaver activity. There are tons of downed trees all over the place in there. So that's going to catch a lot of debris, and it also keeps a lot of paddlers out. I went paddling up Great Meadow Stream on Easter Sunday, and I had to get out of my kayak several times in waders just to get over all of the downed trees from the beavers. So I think that that is helping, because we know that water flow in one direction doesn't prevent fragments from going up because there's wind. If it was all about down, then we wouldn't still have plants up Great Meadow Stream near the bridge, unless there's multiple reintroduction occurrences happening, which is something that I'm actually looking into. So we will know as of next week if we have anything in North Pond or anything in the northern end of Great Meadow Stream, for sure.